This might be a bit of a controversial thing to say, but I kinda like Zelda games. Yeah, you heard me right. The various adventures of the green-suited, tight-wearing elf boy are something I find kinda endearing and perfectly enjoyable. Honestly, sometimes they're inspiring and beautiful. So for me, it kinda stands to reason that something so widely beloved would inspire people to create something of their own. And that's kinda exactly what went down when Nicholas Holland sat down to start working on Yono and the Celestial Elephants a few years ago. Like a lot of games I talk about, I've been following Yono's development for a good chunk of the process. I've seen it come a long way, and generally speaking, I'm a fan. But like pretty much every game in existence, it's not perfect. It has its flaws, the most important of which is something that a lot of tributes fall into. See, Yono has a bit of an identity crisis going on. At times, it seems like this game knows what it's good at, puzzles and world building. But then something comes along that it just isn't very good at and it misses the mark, and as a player and admirer of games, it's kinda confusing to see some of the things that go on here. When it comes to Yono, I'm not sure if I love the game for what it gets right, or if I loathe it for its lack of consistency. And today I want to take a look at those aspects. I want to talk about what it does well, and I want to talk about what causes the issue with identity and how that could have potentially been avoided or maybe just mitigated. Alright, so let's start on a positive note. Let's start with the good, yeah? The puzzle designs in Yono are phenomenal. Each new area of the world that you visit has its own theming, and that bleeds into the puzzles that you have to solve. The game kinda treats puzzles the way you'd expect a dedicated puzzle game to. Each area that you visit serves as kind of a chapter. It starts at a slightly lower difficulty than the last area that you finished up, and then it kinda ramps up from there while pulling in mechanics that you learned previously. No new mechanic is introduced out of nowhere. They kind of follow one of the core Nintendo design principles here, in that they introduce a new function in a safe, low-pressure environment, so you can take your time figuring it out. And then from there, they ramp up the difficulty and pressure in subsequent rooms to kind of test your knowledge of the mechanic. Eventually, it gets mixed up with other systems, and it really starts to force you to change how you think about what's going on. The puzzles are probably the strongest part of Yono, and with the exception of one very specific ice block bastard piece of shit puzzle, I enjoyed all of them. The world building going on here is also pretty well done, at least for the most part. I'll get into that a little bit later. There's some really interesting lore tucked away behind conversations, and there's some real life in the wilderness and towns you visit. The story takes you through the main cities of the world's main races. Humans, standard humans, Bonewights, these really cool undead creatures, and Mekani, which are robot people. Throughout the journey, you learn a fair amount about each species, and you learn about the political struggles that are going on between the three kingdoms, and honestly, I can't praise the world building and the lore enough, especially for the Bonewights. These undead dudes and dudettes have some of the coolest history, and I honestly wouldn't mind a game dedicated to exploring them and their history, cause hot damn, I love it. Thanks to the general quality of execution of the world building in Yono, it really does feel like you're going on an adventure. As cheesy as it can be, and with as many marks as it kind of misses in some of the other areas, this really is one thing that deserves so much praise. And rounding it all out, Yono and the Celestial Elephants is super kid-friendly. If there's a youngster that you know of, whether it's your kid or a cousin or your friend's kid or your brother, whatever, I recommend that they give this a whirl. In general, it's pretty charming, and the story builds on themes of being helpful, nice to those you meet, and kind of pleasant as a whole. The puzzles can kind of help teach some critical thinking skills, and the vibrant colors and bouncing music are more than capable of keeping a kid hooked. I mean, it kept me hooked, and I got so much ADHD. Now then, okay, so not everything about Yono is tip-top fantastic goodness. When you set out to make something as a tribute or to pay homage to something that you love or have great admiration for, is 100% totally okay, and honestly, I encourage it. Without homage, we'd be missing out on a lot of great works, and I'm not just talking about games. But the thing is, there's more to paying homage to something than imitating everything the original did. It's really important to maintain your creation's own identity in order to set it apart, and to stick to whatever particular strengths you have in your own designs or creative endeavors. The biggest problem that Yono has, in my opinion, is it kind of struggles to do that, and that makes everything kind of inconsistent. There are not only varying levels of technical quality, but conflicting design and world-building decisions that make it seem as though there wasn't a set-in-stone path for this project's themes and development, and that is one of the biggest failings any project can have, whether or not it's a tribute. Apart from that, it seems like some things were included or designed as they were in order to be more similar to Zelda. That in and of itself isn't like a cardinal sin or whatever, and if things didn't feel tacked on and were better executed, I'd be totally fine with it. But unfortunately, that's kind of exactly how things are. Take, for example, the biggest offender, combat. Fighting feels like it's there just because it's something that exists in Zelda games. What's different about Zelda though is that the player is given a bunch of tools to use against enemies and in puzzles throughout the entire game. That makes combat varied and to a certain degree allows the player to express some of their own creativity. In Yono, you can headbutt things. Sometimes you can knock a baddie off a ledge, but for the most part you're bashing your skull against an angry thing 3 or 4 times until it poofs out of existence. So I have some ideas of things that could be done to make this more enjoyable and varied. First off, you already use Yono's trunk to solve puzzles throughout the game, either by blowing air to activate a switch or by sucking up and shooting out water to put out fires to cool things down. If you use those features in some way in enemy encounters, that would add a lot. And that kind of plays into my next point, which is that there should really be some kind of variance between enemies. Right now, they may look different, but they all function pretty much the same. They move at you slowly, and if they touch you, you get hurt, and they take damage when you rub your forehead against them. See, in Zelda, combat's pretty interesting because there's a lot of different enemy varieties, each with their own behaviors and weaknesses, unless we're talking about Breath of the Wild, and you have to think on your toes and use different items or abilities to kind of solve your combat encounter. And that kind of bleeds into my third and final point about combat, which is that regular fights should probably take more cues from boss encounters. You see, boss fights in Yono are actually pretty much just high-pressure puzzles. You go in, figure out what particular thing you need to do to the boss to damage it, repeat that a few times, and you win. Maybe regular enemy encounters could have been treated more like this. Get the player to think about how they could most efficiently solve a combat encounter, or try to solve a puzzle under more pressure than just one slow snake chasing them around, and enemies would feel like way more than stuck in things that can hurt you sometimes. So, look, I realize I just kind of went in on this cute little game about being an elephant from space on an adventure through a middle fantasy world filled with deep lore, fun puzzles, and interesting dungeons. But I want to make something clear. This is not a bad game. It's not Game of the Year or anything, but it's far from a terrible time. I think that Yono and a few other tributes of varying success should be kept in mind by future creators. When you set out to make something in order to pay homage to a well-known and widely loved creation, you need to understand that it is a difficult thing to do well. There are a lot of missteps that can be made that will really just screw up the entire project if you're not careful, and it's super damn challenging to strike the perfect balance between shoutouts to your source material and maintaining your creation's own identity. At the end of it all, identity is one of the most important parts of not just paying tribute to something, but creating something in general. And when you set out to make something based on a thing you love, you need to keep in mind that it's as much about your own plans as it is about the original. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Bytes. I hope you enjoyed. What do you think about games that pay tribute and either pay too much or not enough homage to the thing they're trying to pay tribute to? I worded that weird. Whatever. Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, remember to do the YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, share the video, show it to your dog, I don't care, and hit me up on Twitter with anything. Show me your shitpost, I don't care. I'll see you next time. Bye!